Hold up. Because what just landed in federal court has people saying the entire Lil Durk case just took a turn nobody saw coming. If you thought the defense was gaining momentum, think again. Prosecutors are now firing back in a major way, and according to newly filed court documents, they aren't just relying on lyrics or internet rumors. They're signaling that multiple witnesses are prepared to testify about what they claim happened behind the scenes. But that's not even the biggest twist. The government is also pushing for a gag order involving Durk's lead attorney, Drew Findling, arguing that repeated public interviews and media appearances could influence public opinion before the case ever reaches a jury. That's a rare move, and it's instantly become one of the hottest talking points surrounding this federal prosecution. Now here's where things get even more serious. Federal prosecutors say they'll present business records, airline records, phone records, rental vehicle records and testimony from cooperating witnesses to support their case. If those witnesses take the stand, the courtroom could become the center of one of hip-hop's most closely watched legal battles in years. Meanwhile, Durk's legal team continues fighting back, insisting the government has made serious mistakes and challenging key parts of the indictment. So the question is no longer just who's right, it's which side can actually prove its story when the trial begins. This isn't social media gossip. This isn't another rap blog rumor. This is a federal courtroom battle where every filing, every witness, and every public statement could change everything. So stay locked in, because we're breaking down exactly what the prosecutors are alleging, what the defense is saying, and why this latest development has the entire hip-hop community watching every single move. The federal case surrounding Lil Durk has entered another dramatic stage, and this latest development is turning heads across the entire hip-hop world. Just when many people believed the defense was beginning to build momentum, prosecutors responded with a filing that paints a very different picture. According to federal court documents, the government says it is prepared to call witnesses who will testify about what they allege happened behind closed doors. At the same time, prosecutors are asking the court to place restrictions on what Durk's lead attorney, Drew Findling, can publicly say about the case. That combination has sparked intense debate because it suggests the legal battle is no longer just about evidence inside the courtroom. It is also becoming a fight over public opinion, media appearances, and the narrative surrounding one of the biggest rap cases in recent memory. Before diving deeper, it is important to separate allegations from proven facts. Lil Durk has pleaded not guilty, and every allegation made by federal prosecutors must ultimately be tested in court. Nothing filed by the government automatically proves guilt, and every defendant is presumed innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That being said, prosecutors are signaling that they believe they have built a much stronger case than many people first assumed. Rather than relying solely on song lyrics or online speculation, they claim they have gathered testimony from cooperating witnesses along with extensive records that they believe support their version of events. If those witnesses eventually take the stand, their testimony could become one of the most closely watched moments of the entire trial. One of the biggest talking points revolves around the government's claim that cooperating witnesses are prepared to testify about conversations and alleged instructions connected to the case. According to the prosecution's filings, these witnesses are expected to explain events from an insider's perspective. In federal criminal cases, testimony from cooperating witnesses is nothing unusual. Prosecutors often rely on people who are allegedly involved in a conspiracy because they can provide details that documents alone cannot. However, witness testimony is also one of the most heavily challenged forms of evidence. Defense attorneys frequently argue that cooperating witnesses have personal motives, including the possibility of receiving reduced sentences or favorable treatment. That means the credibility of every witness will likely become a major battleground once the case reaches trial. The government's latest filing also focuses attention on Drew Findling, Lil Durk's high-profile defense attorney. Prosecutors argue that his repeated interviews and public discussions about the case risk influencing potential jurors before the trial even begins. They are asking the court to consider a gag order that would limit certain public statements relating to the ongoing proceedings. Gag orders are not handed out casually in federal court, and judges generally balance two competing interests. On one side is the defendant's right to a fair trial, while on the other is the attorney's ability to publicly defend a client against widespread media coverage. Whether the court grants that request remains to be seen, but the fact prosecutors are pursuing it shows just how seriously they view the growing media attention surrounding this case. Another major issue involves the evidence prosecutors say they intend to present. Court filings reference a wide range of records, including airline bookings, mobile phone records, business documents, vehicle rental information, and other material gathered during the investigation. By introducing these records, prosecutors appear to be building a timeline that they believe supports their allegations. Documentary evidence often carries significant weight because it can establish dates, locations, and communications that investigators argue connect different people and events. The defense, however, is expected to examine every document closely, challenging both its relevance and the conclusions prosecutors want the jury to draw from it. In a federal trial, it is not enough simply to possess records. Prosecutors must convince jurors that those records prove exactly what they claim. Adding even more intrigue is the ongoing dispute over evidence connected to mobile phones recovered during an earlier Georgia investigation. The defense has questioned whether some of that evidence should be excluded, while prosecutors argue that the evidence was lawfully obtained through the proper legal process. This disagreement highlights an issue that often becomes crucial in federal criminal cases. If evidence is ruled inadmissible, it cannot be presented to the jury, regardless of how important investigators believe it may be. That is why both sides are fighting so aggressively over these pre-trial motions. Every ruling issued before the trial officially begins could shape what the jury eventually hears, making these legal battles almost as significant as the trial itself. As new filings continue to emerge, all eyes remain fixed on the courtroom, where each decision could dramatically influence the direction of one of hip-hop's most closely followed legal cases. As attention continues to build around the case, many legal analysts believe the battle before the trial may end up being almost as important as the trial itself. Every motion filed by either side has the potential to reshape what evidence a jury will eventually hear. That is why both prosecutors and the defense are investing enormous effort into these early hearings. In federal court, pre-trial rulings often determine whether key evidence can be introduced, whether certain witnesses will be allowed to testify, and even how attorneys can discuss the case publicly. It is a process that unfolds slowly, but every decision can have lasting consequences. For people following the case online, these filings may appear technical, yet they often reveal each side's strategy long before opening statements are ever delivered in front of a jury. One issue receiving significant attention is the government's emphasis on documentary evidence. According to court filings, prosecutors intend to rely on records from airlines, mobile phone providers, business custodians, and vehicle rental companies. Their goal appears to be establishing a timeline that connects people, travel, and communications. Unlike witness testimony, documentary records cannot forget details or change their recollection over time. However, documents do not explain themselves. Prosecutors must convince jurors that those records support the conclusions they are asking them to reach, while the defense will likely argue that the same records can be interpreted in completely different ways. This battle over interpretation often becomes one of the defining features of major federal conspiracy cases. Another question that continues to generate discussion involves the role of cooperating witnesses. Federal prosecutors frequently build complex cases around individuals who agree to testify after entering cooperation agreements. These witnesses may possess information unavailable from phone records or surveillance footage because they claim to have first-hand knowledge of conversations and planning. At the same time, defense attorneys routinely challenge their credibility by arguing that such witnesses have incentives to provide testimony favorable to prosecutors. Jurors are therefore asked to weigh not only what a witness says but also why they may be saying it. That process of evaluating credibility is one of the most important responsibilities assigned to a jury during any criminal trial, especially one receiving national attention. The proposed gag order has also become a major talking point because it reflects the extraordinary amount of publicity surrounding this case. Prosecutors argue that repeated media appearances discussing pending legal issues could influence potential jurors before they are even selected. The defense, meanwhile, has maintained that responding publicly is sometimes necessary when allegations have already dominated headlines across television, podcasts, and social media platforms. Judges considering these requests must strike a careful balance between protecting the integrity of the judicial process and respecting constitutional rights. Whatever decision is ultimately reached, it is likely to shape how much information reaches the public before testimony begins inside the courtroom. The public fascination with the case has also highlighted the growing intersection between hip-hop culture, online media, and the criminal justice system. Every court filing quickly becomes the subject of countless videos, live streams, and debates across social media. Supporters of Lil Durk argue that people should wait until all evidence has been presented before drawing conclusions, while others believe the government's filings indicate prosecutors have assembled a compelling case. In reality, neither public opinion nor internet discussions determine the outcome. Only the evidence admitted in court and the jury's evaluation of that evidence will decide the verdict. Until then, every headline should be viewed in the context of an ongoing legal process rather than a final conclusion. For now, both sides remain firmly committed to their positions. Prosecutors continue to argue that their evidence, taken together, supports the allegations contained in the indictment. The defense continues challenging key aspects of the government's case while insisting that the prosecution has overstated its evidence and made significant errors. As additional motions are argued and more court documents become public, observers will gain a clearer understanding of how each side intends to present its arguments. Yet despite all the speculation surrounding witness testimony, documentary evidence, and media appearances, one fact remains unchanged: the courtroom, not social media, podcasts, or public opinion, is where this case will ultimately be decided. Until that day arrives, every filing, every hearing, and every ruling will continue to fuel one of the most closely followed legal stories in modern hip-hop. As the case moves closer to future court hearings, one question continues to dominate conversations across the hip-hop community: how much of the government's evidence will actually reach the jury? That question is far more important than the headlines circulating on social media. In every major federal prosecution, there is a significant difference between allegations contained in court filings and evidence that is ultimately admitted during trial. Prosecutors may believe they have assembled a compelling case, but each piece of evidence must survive legal challenges before jurors are allowed to consider it. Likewise, the defense does not need to prove innocence. Instead, its responsibility is to challenge the government's evidence, question witness credibility, and demonstrate that prosecutors have not met the high legal standard required for a criminal conviction. Those legal principles will shape every stage of this case moving forward. Much of the attention remains focused on the witnesses prosecutors say they intend to present. Court filings suggest that some of these individuals will provide testimony about events, communications, and planning that investigators believe are relevant to the charges. However, experienced defense attorneys often spend considerable time examining a witness's background, prior statements, and any agreements made with the government. If a witness has received a plea agreement or expects a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation, the defense will almost certainly highlight those facts before the jury. Prosecutors, on the other hand, will argue that cooperation does not automatically make testimony unreliable and that jurors should consider the entire body of evidence rather than focusing on one individual's motivation. This back and forth is common in federal trials and often becomes one of the most dramatic moments inside the courtroom. Equally significant is the government's reliance on digital and business records. Modern federal investigations frequently involve thousands of pages of documents, including mobile phone records, travel records, financial transactions, and electronic communications. Prosecutors often use these materials to establish timelines and corroborate witness testimony. If a witness describes a meeting or a trip, investigators may attempt to support that account with travel records, phone data, or other documents. The defense, however, may argue that those same records do not necessarily prove criminal intent. A flight reservation, a telephone call, or a vehicle rental may establish that someone traveled or communicated, but it does not automatically establish why those actions occurred. Ultimately, the jury must determine whether the government's interpretation is supported beyond a reasonable doubt. The debate surrounding Drew Findling's public comments also continues to attract attention because it reflects the increasingly complicated relationship between high-profile criminal cases and the 24-hour news cycle. In previous decades, many legal disputes unfolded with relatively little public discussion outside the courtroom. Today, every filing can become a trending topic within minutes, analyzed by legal commentators, journalists, content creators, and fans across multiple platforms. Prosecutors argue that extensive public commentary risks influencing potential jurors before trial, while defense attorneys often contend that responding publicly is necessary when accusations have already received widespread coverage. Whatever the court decides regarding the requested gag order, the issue demonstrates how modern media has become an unavoidable factor in many celebrity prosecutions. Another important point often overlooked in online discussions is that pre-trial motions can dramatically alter the direction of a case. A judge may decide that certain evidence should be excluded, that additional discovery must be provided, or that legal arguments require further review before trial proceeds. These rulings rarely generate the same attention as sensational headlines, yet they can significantly affect both sides' strategies. A single judicial decision may strengthen one party's position while forcing the other to adjust its approach. That is why experienced legal observers pay close attention not only to dramatic allegations but also to the procedural rulings that quietly shape what will happen once jurors enter the courtroom. For now, the case remains exactly where it belongs, within the federal judicial system. Prosecutors continue expressing confidence in the evidence they have gathered, while the defense maintains that the government's allegations will not withstand careful scrutiny. Until testimony is presented under oath and challenged through cross-examination, many of the claims circulating online remain just that, claims. The coming hearings will provide additional insight into how the judge views the pending motions and what evidence will eventually be presented at trial. Until then, every new filing is likely to generate another wave of discussion throughout the hip-hop community. Regardless of which side ultimately prevails, this case has already become one of the most closely followed legal battles in rap, serving as a reminder that courtroom outcomes are determined by admissible evidence, legal arguments, and the decisions of a jury, not by viral clips, social media debates, or public speculation. What makes this case especially fascinating is that it has become much bigger than one artist or one indictment. It has evolved into a conversation about how federal prosecutors investigate high-profile figures, how defense attorneys respond under intense public scrutiny, and how social media can influence the public's perception of a criminal case long before a jury is ever sworn in. Every new filing seems to spark another wave of reactions online, with thousands of people claiming to know exactly how the case will end. Yet experienced legal observers continue to emphasize the same point. Federal cases are won or lost inside the courtroom, not in comment sections. While internet debates can shape public opinion, they do not replace sworn testimony, admissible evidence, or the legal instructions that jurors receive from a judge. Another issue attracting attention is the government's apparent confidence in its investigation. Prosecutors rarely reveal every detail of their evidence before trial, but the documents filed so far suggest they believe multiple forms of evidence will reinforce one another. Rather than depending on a single witness or one isolated piece of evidence, the government appears to be constructing a case built on several different categories of proof. If prosecutors can connect witness testimony with phone records, travel records, and other business documents, they may argue that each piece strengthens the credibility of the others. The defense, however, is expected to challenge that approach by arguing that separate pieces of evidence do not automatically create a complete or accurate picture. Establishing a timeline is one thing, proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt is another matter entirely. One reason federal prosecutors often favor this layered approach is because juries tend to evaluate the totality of the evidence rather than focusing on one dramatic moment. A witness may provide one version of events, while electronic records either support or contradict that account. If several independent sources point in the same direction, prosecutors may argue that the evidence becomes more persuasive. Defense lawyers, meanwhile, frequently search for inconsistencies between documents and testimony, hoping to create reasonable doubt. Even a seemingly minor discrepancy can become significant if it raises questions about the reliability of the government's overall narrative. That is why every record, every interview, and every statement made during the investigation can become the subject of detailed examination during trial. The discussion surrounding Drew Findling's media appearances also raises broader questions about how attorneys represent clients in the digital age. High-profile lawyers are often invited to appear on podcasts, television programs, and online interviews because the public wants immediate explanations about complex legal developments. Those appearances can help explain the defense's position, but prosecutors argue they may also influence potential jurors who encounter those interviews before entering the courtroom. Judges therefore face the difficult task of balancing free expression with the need to protect the fairness of judicial proceedings. Whether the requested restrictions are granted or denied, the debate illustrates how dramatically the legal landscape has changed in an era where news spreads across the internet within minutes. At the same time, this case serves as another reminder of how closely federal authorities examine digital communications and everyday records during long-term investigations. Modern technology leaves behind an enormous amount of information, from travel confirmations and telephone records to electronic payments and location data. Investigators often analyze these materials over many months before bringing formal charges. However, the existence of records alone does not automatically prove criminal conduct. Prosecutors must still explain why those records matter and how they fit within the broader allegations contained in the indictment. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, may argue that perfectly lawful activities are being interpreted in the most damaging way possible. Ultimately, jurors will decide which explanation they find more convincing after hearing both sides present their arguments. As the legal process continues, one reality remains unchanged. Lil Durk has pleaded not guilty, and the burden of proof rests entirely with the government. Prosecutors must establish every element of the charged offenses beyond a reasonable doubt, while the defense has the opportunity to challenge witnesses, dispute evidence, and present its own interpretation of the facts. Until those proceedings unfold in open court, speculation will continue to dominate online conversations. Yet history has shown that high-profile federal cases often contain unexpected developments, including witness challenges, evidentiary rulings, and strategic decisions that can reshape the direction of a trial. For now, the courtroom remains the only place where those questions will ultimately be answered. Until the judge rules on the pending motions and testimony begins under oath, every headline should be viewed as another chapter in an ongoing legal battle rather than the final verdict in one of hip-hop's most closely watched federal cases. And that's where we're going to leave this update for now, because this case is moving fast, and every new court filing seems to reveal another piece of the puzzle. Remember, what we've discussed today comes from publicly reported court proceedings and legal filings, and like every federal case, the allegations still have to be tested in court. Lil Durk has pleaded not guilty, and only the evidence presented before a jury will determine the outcome. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the prosecution has built a strong case with the witnesses and records they're talking about, or do you think the defense still has major arguments that could change everything before this case reaches trial? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this is one of those stories where every opinion matters, and I read as many of your comments as I can. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more real-time updates on the biggest stories in hip-hop, federal cases, and entertainment news, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss an update. We cover every major development as soon as it happens, and we always break down the court documents, legal filings, and industry news in a way that's easy to understand. Also, don't forget to share this video with your friends because chances are they're already seeing headlines about this case, but they may not know what's actually happening behind the scenes. The conversation is only getting bigger, and there are still plenty of unanswered questions. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I truly appreciate every single one of you for your support. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one with another major update.